The trans community in the UK has gone into full meltdown mode.
Unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
All right, so the Supreme Court in the UK has decided that when they say women, they mean women. And this is so exciting. I can't wait until the Supreme Court in the UK lets us know that water is wet, the sky is blue, and the earth is round. What a time to be alive.
Trans rights groups, as you can see here, and trade unions came together for what they described as an emergency demonstration in London's Parliament Square, while a rally organised by a group called Resisting Transphobia took place in Edinburgh.
I can't believe they would have the nerve to have a protest there, because if you're not familiar, there was this particular person by the name of Isla Bryson that identified as a trans woman. Before Isla Bryson transitioned, she had R-worded 2 women, was convicted of it, and then they sent her to a women's prison. Now tell me how that makes sense. Of course, women and others were outraged because they were being sent to a women's prison. But then the Scottish Prison Service, otherwise known as the SPS, had this to say: where there are any concerns about any risk posed by an individual, either to themselves or others, we retain the ability to keep them separate from the mainstream population until an agreed management plan is in place. So in other words, the SPS said, don't worry your pretty little heads about that, ladies. We definitely know what's best for you, and we'll let you know who is and isn't safe, and when they are and aren't safe. And that was one of the first big uproars that I personally heard about in the UK, where women's rights were really being violated. So I think the trans activists have a lot of nerve, especially protesting there, when I honestly do feel that if the trans community and the trans activists were better at self-policing, we wouldn't be dealing with any of this right now.
It comes, of course, after the UK Supreme Court ruled that the legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex. Some of the placards they were holding to sense an angry tone. One read, and just to warn you, some of you may find this offensive, it read, "The only good turf is a dead turf."
Okay, I'm gonna explain to you why signs like this are so counterproductive to the cause. And full disclosure, I have gotten into it with the TERFs myself before. Maybe one day I'll talk about that again, or maybe I'll make the video where I talk about it my pinned comment. That's what I'll do, is I'll put the video where I actually talked about it in my pinned comment, just so we can save some time. If you want to see it, check it out. And for anybody that's not familiar, because every once in a while I do get people in my comments asking me what a TERF is. TERF stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. So a TERF is a feminist who doesn't believe that trans women should be considered women in any way that actually matters, which, to be honest, that's where me and the TERFs definitely do agree. Because while I've had trans friends for the last 30 years, which I make no secret of, my trans friends never required that I lie to them. And even when they would refer to themselves as women, because every once in a while they'd be like, honey, I'm a woman, what are you talking about? And it was always with a little bit of a wink and a, you know, we're just playing right now. And we never took it seriously in that way. We always knew what their biology was. And so in that way, I very much do stand with the TERFs on feeling like what it is to actually be a woman and what it is feminism in its original definition is supposed to actually encompass does not cover trans women. So I definitely do understand that. You also should know that there are a lot of people that are called TERFs by the trans community that are not at all TERFs, because being a TERF is an actual thing. It's an ideology. But the reason that I say that these signs are so counterproductive is because a TERF, by definition, is a woman. The people that you call TERFs just for not agreeing with you are women. So basically, when you're saying the only good TERF is a turf, really what you're doing is threatening women. And this is one of the biggest problems I've always had with the trans activist and the way that they interact with women, is what you say to women is that we're not a threat to you. We are not at all a danger to you, unless you refuse to accept us as being women just like you. And then in that case, you better watch out, ladies, because you will be in danger. It was like that one that went viral on TikTok. It was a trans person that said,
I dare you to try and stop me from going into a women's bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make. I dare you to try and stop a transgender woman in my presence from using the bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make. This is a call to action and a call to arms to everybody within the United States that are scared, worried, have children that are transgender, lesbian, bi, or gay. This is a call to action. You need to arm up. Plain and simple. Go out, buy a gun, learn how to use it efficiently, through and through, because the time to act is now.
So basically what you're saying is you will end somebody over them trying to keep you out of a space that you by rights don't have any claim on. There's no reason that there should be this entitlement. For a long time, a lot of women were very accepting of having trans women or trans people in their spaces. This is something that I personally witnessed. And then that went from trans people being appreciative to women for allowing them in their spaces or sharing their spaces. And I know not all women were down with it, but I am telling you that a lot in major cities were cool with sharing space with trans women or people that identified as trans women, however you want to put that. But then it came to a place of entitlement where trans women felt like they now did not need the approval of women to be in women's spaces. They were women just as much as women, and in some cases more so than women. So for them to get violent or do anything that they felt they needed to do in order to protect their rights was completely justifiable and reasonable. And that's where a lot of real women just started getting like, no, we're not doing that. So like I said, if you thought at that time or you think now that threatening women is the way to get access to women's spaces, you really are misguided and don't understand that thinking like this is a part of the reason that you're in the position you're in now.
Another said, transphobes, fix your hearts, or as you can see here, if you're watching on telly.
And that sign there is a perfect example of respect me as a woman or I will turn into a big scary man, which A, is not very ladylike, and B, can only hurt your cause.
It only applies to the Equality Act, it doesn't apply wider. And secondly, it does not require institutions to exclude trans people. It merely gives them the option.
I think being given the option, most businesses and institutions will exercise that option.
Trans women are women.
Yeah, sweetie, and hot dogs are dogs.
I think as long as you're not hurting another human being and you're following the letter of the law, you should be able to say what you want, do what you want, wear what you want, and kiss who you want, as long as you're not breaking any laws. I'm about the free speech.
Okay, I just included this trans person because I really feel like they just had nothing better to do with their afternoon and weren't really paying attention to what the protest is about, because nobody has a problem with trans people saying what they want, wearing what they want, or kissing who they want. The only thing, well, as long as the person consents to it, obviously. The only thing that people are worried about that she said is doing what they want, and that's because trans people do not just automatically have access to women's spaces.
So instead of policing women's bodies, because by the way, this ruling is only about trans women. It's only women that they control and police, not men, never men.
It's not men driving this. And if you think about it that way, honestly, if we were trying to do that, or if any men were trying to do that, what we would be trying to do is detransition trans men, because trans men are born female. So if we were trying to police women's bodies, then who we would go after would be the trans men, because trans men do have female bodies. So if that's what we were trying to police, what we would be trying to do is get them to detransition and be good girls and make themselves attractive to the male gaze. We'd be trying to force them to be ready to give birth, if that's what this was about.
They've won their battle over the legal definition of what a woman is.
All hospital wards, all changing rooms, they will all be women only.
What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. All right, you guys. So I wanted to talk about this immediately after it happened, but I was covering the Carmelo Anthony situation, and I felt like that was a bit more pressing. I will get back to that when there are updates, but right now there's not a lot really happening, and it's like I don't like to talk about any one subject too much, or else I get bored, and I feel like you guys get bored too. Well, there are different times when things are important enough that they require more than one video. Sometimes it's like, okay, enough is enough on that. And plus, if you know my channel, you know that I have been heavy on trying to help the trans community understand that all of the tactics that they've been employing in the last several years now were going to backfire, that this was coming down the pike. So I had to make a video, even though I didn't want to be an I told you so, to say, I told you so. I warned you. And so did a lot of us. So did Blair White. So did Buck Angel. So did Marcus Deeb. There were a lot of us that tried to help you completely avoid what this has turned into. And I hate to tell you, but trans people are not losing rights. What trans people were losing is privileges. Privileges that were in a lot of cases granted to them by women. Not all women, but definitely granted to them by women. So when trans people are upset and they're marching and they're protesting, I really don't think that the people that they think they're raging against are the people that they should be raging against. You shouldn't be mad at J.K. Rowling. You shouldn't be mad at the women that wanted their spaces to be single sex. You shouldn't be mad at the Supreme Court. You shouldn't be mad at the Labor Party. Who you should be mad at is your friends that lied to you and told you that you were something that you weren't. And then, of course, there were buffoons just crying on TikTok, which I never get these. Technically, this one had music with it, but I don't know if the music's copyright, so I didn't want to take the chance, so I just took the music off of it. But you can imagine just sad music and this person in disbelief, can't understand how this happened. I can't relate. And how dare you try to convince us all this time that you have trans pride and there is such a thing as trans pride, but then you try to completely deny the entire thing that makes you trans, because what makes you trans is the fact that you were born male. Your being male is what makes you a trans woman, if that's how you want to put it. So you're the one denying what you are, and I've always wished and hoped that the trans community would accept themselves as much as we, the general public, accept them. Because for as much as you try to make it seem like we are denying your existence, we are affirming your existence by saying that you are male, that presents female, and most of us accept that for the reality that it is, and understand that it is a legitimate mental condition for a certain part of the population, a very small part of the population, but nonetheless a part of the population. And like I said, if trans people had been more respectful towards women in the way that they dealt with them, or in understanding where it was women were coming from, then we wouldn't be dealing with this problem right now. But trans people tried to not only share womanhood, whether or not certain women wanted it, but they also tried to completely take it over. And that's when things started happening with sports and with female-only spaces and with certain rights that trans people decided that they should be able to share with women. And I'll play for you really quick a clip that explains it more. But in this clip, you will notice that trans people's rights are still covered as being transgender. They're just not covered under women's rights anymore. And the Supreme Court clarified that when it's referring specifically to women, that does mean real women, biological women. So
the UK Supreme Court has ruled that the legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex. The ruling followed a case between the Scottish Government, which argued trans people with a gender recognition certificate are entitled to sex-based protections, and campaign group For Women Scotland, who argued these protections should only apply to those assigned female at birth. So what does this actually mean in reality? This decision means women's only spaces, for example hospital wards or sports clubs, can legally exclude trans women if it's proportionate to do so. But judges stress that this isn't a victory for either side, as the Equality Act still recognises gender reassignment as a protected characteristic, aka you can't discriminate against someone just because they're trans. The Equality and Human Rights Commission says exclusions should be assessed case by case, with organisations considering gender-neutral options. While some see this ruling as clarifying the law, it raises concerns about exclusion for trans people.
And there's an explanation of what's going on. So I'm not really sure why trans people are so up in arms. And if they want to fight for a third space, they can definitely do that. Or they can just use the bathroom of the gender that they were assigned at birth or that was observed at birth, or however you guys want to say that. I know sometimes when I say it a particular way, people in my comments will get like, that's not the way you say that. So however you would say it, you'd say it. Tired of arguing people about things that don't matter. Language is meant for communicating. So if you understood where I was getting at, we don't have to be so particular, especially when we're on the same side. One thing that really kills me about some of you, it's not assigned at birth, it's observed at birth. And if you don't say it that way, the whole world will explode! But anyway, what I was getting, which I halfway joke, but at the same time, I am being serious when I say that some of you get a little too nitpicky with me, and it's like, we're on the same side. I don't even know why you're trying to argue with me right now. It really does just come down to, I want to feel like I know everything, so I'm going to say what. Leave it in your comments. Anyway, like, comment, and subscribe. When you hit the subscribe button, make sure you click the bell and select all notifications so that you know every time I upload, and I'm gonna lose it like I just did. But seriously, do like, do comment, do subscribe. It does help me out on the channel. And I am having fun with this because this one to me actually shows that the world is getting back to a place of sanity, because the UK has had it rough when it comes to the way that women there are being treated, and their opinions and their feelings and their rights are just completely being discarded. And it's all because of the trans activists. And the reason that I always use the term trans activist, or try to use it as much as I possibly can, is because everyday trans people, transsexuals as we used to call them when I was younger, are honestly dealing with the mental condition and are not at all trying to infringe upon women's rights, or are not trying to invade women's spaces, are not trying to invade women's sports. Like a couple of weeks ago, I covered the story where they had the women's pool championship that had no actual women in it. It was two biological males competing against each other for the women's championship. And some people would say, well, in a game like pool, how does that really matter? Okay, let's take away any kind of physical advantage that people may think would apply. Reach when you're dealing with the pool table, stronger break, but let's go ahead and take that away. And let's just say that it's an opportunity for biological women to win some extra money at something that they put years into actually being good at. And now that opportunity to make that money is taken away from them by biological males. Now, if you want to say that there shouldn't be a male and a female division when it comes to a game like pool or a game like darts, then that's an argument I think you can have if you want to. It's not something I'm going to engage in because I can understand how people would want to play against other people of their own gender. But if you want to make that argument, you're welcome to it. But as long as they do have a male and a female category or a men's and a women's category, I think the males should play with the men and the females should play with the women. And I don't think there's anything wrong with women saying that that's the way that they think that it should be. And I don't think that it's at all bigoted. And another thing that I think was a big sticking point for a lot of real women is that real women didn't want to be referred to as cis, which to me is a completely reasonable request. And you have to remember that for quite a while there, real women were willing to share the title of women, or at least the name women, with trans women. Real women weren't really making a big deal of the term trans woman. They may not have loved it, but I don't think anybody really paid attention to it. So then the trans activists decided that in order for them to feel more comfortable with who they are, and you can look into the history of it if you want to, if you don't believe me, but this really is where the term came from. But in order for them to feel more comfortable about what they were, it wasn't fair for them to be called trans women and women to just be women. Women had to be called cis women to make the difference, which makes no sense at all. And you really don't need a distinction other than putting the prefix trans on the front of trans woman. Because if you just say woman, nobody at all is going to be confused. Just like with coffee, when you go in and you order a coffee, they don't ask you if you mean decaffeinated coffee. They know you mean a regular coffee. Just like when we're talking about women. If I'm just talking about women and I don't add the prefix of trans on the front of it, I don't think a single person would be confused and be like, wait a second, did you mean a regular woman or a trans woman? Everybody would know that I was talking about a woman. So then on top of that, to add further insult, that's when they really started trying to push the trans women are women. Well, if trans women are women, so now they become the default woman. That's basically the thinking, right? Then a woman is now relegated to being a cis woman. So now you have overtaken the word woman to the point where the trans woman is supposed to be the default woman, and the actual woman, what we all know to be a woman, an adult human female, is now being rebranded as a cis woman. Ask yourself, did you really think that was going to work out? Did you really think that all of society was going to let you completely overtake the term woman and become the new default woman? Makes no sense at all. And I don't think that there's anything at all discriminatory or bigoted in women saying, no, we're not doing that. We're just not. We're not going to be cis women. Just like I was seeing this particular woman on TikTok saying that she didn't like to be called biological.
Because I refuse to be labelled as a washing powder. I am neither biological nor non-biological. Nor am I hand-washed.
Which must be a UK thing because we don't really refer to laundry detergent here in the States as biological or non-biological. But I can understand what she's saying, obviously. And like I already screamed at everybody, the purpose of language is communication. So I'm not going to pretend that what she's saying is completely foreign to me. But what I would say is, I don't know why this woman thinks it's okay for her to say that she doesn't want to be referred to as biological or non-biological, but then not be able to understand when other women say they don't want to be referred to as cis women. And call me revolutionary, but maybe I think that any woman, any person should be able to decide for themselves the way that they'd like to be referred to within whatever they are, which is one of the biggest problems I had with the trans community when they were doing the non-binary and the they and the them and the z and the zir. And how is it you can be a she or a her even if you were born male, or a they and a them even though you're a singular person, or a z and a zir which is something that you just made up. And we're all supposed to go along with that. But then women make the simple request that you not refer to them as cis, and suddenly that makes them bigoted, and that means that they're hateful towards trans people. I mean, honestly, make it make sense. The rules are also a part of how you guys lost everybody, because the rules just weren't consistent and they didn't seem to apply to trans people. Everything that you would ask from the general population could not be asked of you. And the big irony in that is a lot of what you were asking for was for the rest of us to completely deny reality. And we were coming at everything from a truly biological and scientific standpoint. And I have still seen no proof or evidence of the fact that there are anything more than two genders, two sexes. Well, intersex is its own thing. And that would be a group that I think should have some rights as far as being able to determine the way that they're referred to, or where we might need to make special concessions. But I'm not 100% sure on that. But it's something that's worth looking into, because it is undeniably a way that people are born. But nobody ever talks about it in a serious way. It's always hypothetical. Well, if I was intersex, well, if you're not, then shut up about it. Just stop. You were born male or female, there's nothing wrong with that. But stop trying to bring everything else into it. And I also saw this same woman talking about the fact that...
Have you not thought for a second why there isn't a UK Supreme Court ruling over what a man is? Why is it just women?
And basically saying that this is the patriarchy, not realizing that they're standing up for the patriarchy in drag right now. Everything that these people say in regards to this does completely hinge on the fact that we all have to buy trans women as women. So when you say to us that this is men deciding what women are, but then I see the people that are campaigning for these distinctions and wanting to hold on to women's rights are actual women. And this is something that I've been covering for quite a while now, and I know that it is biological women that are really driving this movement. Because if you left it up to men to tell you the truth, men wouldn't care either way. Men would be like, if the women are fine with it, we're fine with it. What do we care? If the women want these biological males in their spaces, they can have them in their spaces. It's not our business. That's the way it would be if men were really the ones driving this. There would be no drive to it. What it is a lot of biological women are not comfortable with having to share certain spaces, because it did turn into women's prisons. It did turn into battered women's shelters. It did turn into changing rooms, women specific wards at hospitals. This is what it turned into. And it's women at their most vulnerable state in a lot of these cases. And they were saying that they weren't comfortable with males present. They didn't have a problem with the way they identified. They don't have a problem with trans people. They just have certain spaces that they want to be female only. And that's why respective governments and society have went ahead and stepped in, is because women did actually want this. Women wanted these distinctions made. And then this person and another were bringing up trans men. Why don't we ever talk about trans men?
But I never hear you talk about trans men. I only ever hear you talk about trans women.
So you want trans men to now be getting changed in women's changing rooms and using women's toilets.
And the truth is, trans men do not pose any kind of physical threat to genetic males. So there's that. There's also the fact that trans men tend to understand that they will never be actual men. I've only met a few online, never in real life, that really thought that they had any claim on what actual manhood is. Where with some trans women, the new school version, and not usually actual transsexuals, they think that being a woman is as simple as a little bit of nail polish, some eyeshadow, and possibly a wig. Maybe not even a wig, maybe not even makeup. Sometimes just nail polish. If you've seen what is identifying as a woman nowadays. And then the other thing that also adds to the insult being put upon women is that non-binary, which is when you don't identify as either gender, for some reason, when they're male, their default is to go into the women's bathroom. Well, if you don't identify as male or female, then why would you need access to women's spaces in order to feel like you are being validated? To me, that doesn't make sense at all. If you don't care about gender that way and you're truly non-binary, then you should be fine using the facilities of your birth sex, because for you, it doesn't matter anyway. But these people will fight and argue that they belong in the women's bathroom. Well, again, why is it women specifically and exclusively have to bow down to genetic males? To me, that is being more misogynistic and chauvinistic than the opposite. All we're saying, and by us, I mean the men that are backing women up on this, we're not trying to tell them how to be women in any way. All we're saying is if you're not comfortable with this, we have your backs. If you don't want this to continue to go on, we will support you in that. And then some of these people were like,
if it's trans men that need to be going into women's changing rooms, doesn't it make it 100 times easier for a cis man to pretend that they're a post-op trans man to gain access to women's spaces? You've made it easier for the predators, not harder.
Well, one, you're stupid if you just thought of that, because most of us have been talking about that for months, if not years now. But because men are willing to do women a solid and we don't feel threatened, trans men are just going to continue to go into the men's bathroom. So we really don't have to worry about that. If anybody decides to do that, a trans man decides to just start going into the women's bathroom, I think what they're going to find out is it's not really going to be a problem, because when somebody really scans them up and down, they're going to be like, yeah, I can see that. You have small hands, small feet, the frame of a woman. You're a little enough man that we can tell that you are definitely born female. We wouldn't have thought about it if you hadn't brought it to our attention. But now that we're seeing you, yeah. Because that's the thing. Trans men will be very passable when you just see them, because, you know, they're on HRT, which is testosterone. And in a lot of cases, they will really bulk up and they will have some muscle, or in some cases, they get chubby. They will look like men at a glance, just like men at a glance. But once you really examine them, if just like with trans women can be very beautiful and very feminine looking. But if you were to really scan them and try to find the flaws or try to find the telltales that they are male, you would be able to. Same thing with trans men. But if they do that, that's going to be a complete stunt, because nobody is trying to say that trans men can't continue to use men's facilities. We really don't care that way. That's a complete nothing burger. Nobody's trying to make that happen. That's you making up a scenario to try to make trouble that just isn't there.
What's stopping a man just putting a wig on and saying that he's a trans woman and going into women's spaces?
And when people say these things aren't happening, I do understand the argument that it's not trans women that are doing this. But I also understand that because everything has gotten so loosey-goosey and people don't even need to actually have gender dysphoria, which is the mental condition that's associated or has been traditionally associated with being transgender or being transsexual. When you completely drop all of that and now it's just self-ID and a doctor doesn't have anything to do with it, you just have to say that you are this thing, and then you have access to these female spaces, then that does open the door for bad people. Just like this case in Windsor that I want to talk about just really quick. I want to read this to you so that you understand what it is I'm saying. The Windsor Police Service is searching for a suspect wanted in connection to a assault earlier this month. On April 4th, 2023, a female victim contacted police to report that she had been sexually assaulted while staying at a Windsor women's shelter. The suspect, who was also residing at the shelter at the time, allegedly climbed into the victim's bed and sexually assaulted assaulted her. The suspect has been identified as 32-year-old Desiree Anderson, who also may be known as Cody D'Entremont. So that's an example right there for you. And yeah, that doesn't mean that that's what every trans person is doing or every person that identifies as trans is doing. But it does open the door for these kind of bad actors to sneak in because of the way everything's gotten so loose. Here's another one. A trans woman has been jailed for 6.5 years after being found guilty of R-word following a night out. Lexi Secker R-worded a woman in Blunson, Wiltshire on the 23rd of April 2023. The attack took place before Secker began identifying as a woman. So these people seem to be committing these crimes and then identifying as trans after, which who knows how genuine or how real that is, but it seems like they may be doing that so that they have access to women's prisons, women's facilities, and not only for access to the women, in my opinion, but also because they'll have an easier go of it if they're not surrounded by other males who know that that's what they've been convicted of. Which I don't know if it's like that in the UK, but here in the States, other prisoners are tougher on men that have been convicted of crimes against children and women. So I don't know if that holds true in the UK, but here in the States it definitely does. So there's two reasons right there. But I've covered other stories like that here on my channel, so I know that there's a lot more. I just don't want to waste the time of going through all of them. And really my point isn't to point fingers, but it's just to say to the women that are really trying to push this, that it's all men that are trying to decide this for women and not understanding that all you would have to do is that entire row of women you saw standing up shouting and that were overjoyed that this decision was made. Why don't you as a woman go talk to those women and ask them why they feel the way they feel, instead of trying to blame it on men who, like I said, are really just backing women like that up. So I don't know why this is being blamed on men by these women that just can't accept the fact that you're in the minority when it comes to women being comfortable with that. You are one of the women that is. And good on ya, as they would say. I'm happy for you that you're that open-minded, but you don't get to make that decision for the majority. You don't get to decide for all women that they're comfortable with what you're comfortable with. And if you were really doing trans women a favor, you would stop lying to them and stop making it seem like trans women are women, because in case my words aren't telling you, or the different people online aren't telling you, or the women that were pushing for these decisions, we don't all see it that way. Even a lot of trans people will tell you that they don't see it that way. So you are really just coming up with this thing in your head to let us all know how liberal you are and how free you'll be with your thinking, when it does nobody any favors at all, especially not the trans person, because the trans person then ends up getting their heart broken when they find out the world doesn't agree with them. But the last clip I'll show you guys is this particular person who to me epitomizes what the problem is. Because if you look at this person, what about any of what you're doing, because the caption says trans woman, what about any of what you're doing is giving woman? Is it the pink backpack that makes you a woman? Is the transition in the room with us, is what I want to know. And then this person has the nerve to say that they've been betrayed. The trans community has been betrayed by the Labour Party.
This week, the Supreme Court ruled against us, and the Labour Party backed them. And that betrayal will not be forgotten, because they promised dignity and we believed them. They said they'd reform the GRA and we trusted them. And
well, why is it the trans activists never talk about the way that they betrayed the rest of what used to be considered the LGBTQ community? Because if you didn't know, a lot of us don't even identify with the community anymore, because the trans activists took it over and turned it into something that most of us never even signed up for in the first place. Most of us didn't want to turn trans and LGBT into a thing for the whole family and the children, and trying to trans the children, and any of the stuff that it has turned into was not what most of us signed on for. What most of us wanted to do was be able to live our lives in peace, not face any kind of discrimination when it came to employment, and the same freedoms and rights as anybody else, which is what most of us wanted. And even trans people had pretty much gotten there. Some people would say that trans people were ahead of gays in being able to get certain rights, because once they had their gender legally changed and the law recognized them as a woman, they had access to get married. They were, in essence, living as women. So these movements have completely undone that and betrayed actual transsexual people, betrayed the LGBT community at large, and most importantly in this instance, betrayed the women that were so trusting and welcoming and supportive of them. So my point in all of this is that you only have yourselves to blame, and you need to stop being mad at everybody else. And you can march all you want. You march your little legs off for all any of us care. But it's not going to change anything, because what's done is done. And we've already seen that when we join you in the land of make-believe to any degree, you abuse and gaslight us while we're there. So we're not going back on any level. March all you want. You're a small enough part of the population that you better be thankful that transgender is being recognized in any way when it comes to the law. If people weren't being at all accommodating to you, there would be no transgender protections. You would already be covered by discrimination laws provided for your birth sex. The same protections that would apply to all the rest of us would be the only thing you were offered as well. But instead, people are accommodating enough to include transgender or orientation. And if that's not good enough for you, it's just not good enough for you. You're never going to be happy. You march till your heart's content. But when you get tired and you need to go cry in the bathroom, you cry in the appropriate bathroom. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. If you want to see my latest video on the Carmelo Anthony stupidity and how this buffoon tried to blame it on the rain, click the video on your screen. Other than that, as always, thank you for watching. This has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.
They bought into his bullshit.